Welcome everyone to this webinar about a secure and efficient approach to test data management. Today we would like to deep dive together with all of you about the potential of test data, its challenges, and best practices so that organizations can realize the potential value of proper test data management. As for today, we have an agenda where we will discuss various topics. And we will start with discussing the hidden costs of poor test data management, and where we will also deep dive in some of the typical challenges that organizations face that do not have proper test data. And we will also share some poll questions that we shared before in preparation to this webinar on LinkedIn. Thereafter, we will deep dive beyond traditional test data management approaches, where we will touch base topics like GDPR compliance, accelerate processes with AI-powered solutions, and of course, how to create realistic production-like test data for specific use cases. And we will tackle those topics with a live demo. Then we will proceed to the return on investments of smarter test data, and we will finalize with Q&A. In case you have any questions now during the webinar or during the Q&A, please share them via the chat. We will gather all questions together, and we will try to cover them during the webinar. If we are not able to cover them during the webinar, we will make sure that we have a summary as recap that we will share to everyone that was registered for this webinar. And we will share that together with the slides that we showed during this session. A little bit introduction about Syntho. Syntho was founded in 2020, Amsterdam-based, with the mission to build smart solution for test data management. With that, our mission is to empower businesses to use high-quality synthetic data at scale, typically for test data management. And with that, we want to open a data economy where data can be used, but especially without compromising on privacy. We do that with our solution, the Syntho engine, by which we want to unlock privacy-sensitive data, want to reduce the time to data, and of course, make sure that you have high-quality representative test data. With Syntho, we want to build all synthetic data generation approaches in one platform, so that you have one platform supporting everything, ranging from test data management, data masking, and AI-generated synthetic data. Because typically you have original data at the left side that typically contains sensitive information, PII, and that simply cannot be used as test data. With our platform, we have all the capabilities how to turn that in a synthetic data twin, how that really mimics the production data as closely as possible, so that it, on the one hand, suitable for test data purposes, and on the other hand, privacy preservative. Our approach is to build the most versatile platform, and with that, we want to use and combine all available data generation methods in one platform, and that you can really combine all best practices given your use case. We want to build a faster solution so that you can generate data with maximum speed and minimal quick clicks. And finally, have a platform that is easy to use and easy to collaborate with, how to make data generation accessible for all, both technical and non-technical users. Of course, we will deep dive into that today. And to give a short summary, I am not going to deep dive into this in detail because we will share the slides. But with test data management, we mean that the purpose is to create, maintain, and control representative test data for non-production environments. Data masking, there we aim to protect sensitive information by removing or modifying personally identifiable information, also known as PII. And synthetic data generation, where we aim to mimic statistical patterns of original data in synthetic data with the power of artificial intelligence. Today, we will deep dive in all of those solutions with a focus on test data management. And we will, start with that in a bit. Before we do that, I think it's interesting to start with what are actually the hidden costs of poor test data. And I think it's interesting to also discuss that with you, Marijn. We have some interesting poll questions that we shared in preparation to this session. So what did we do? We drafted some multiple choice questions related to test data. Instead of us providing the answers, it's interesting to really see what is the audience telling us. So I think the first question that we asked the audience was, what are the main challenges with test data? And I think it's interesting to see that with 397 votes, we see that most people actually picked data quality as the key challenge for test data management, next to data privacy concerns. Marijn, just asking you, what do you recognize this if you're talking to customers, or what's your response to those results?
Yeah, I'm not so surprised actually, because data quality is typically something we hear a lot from customers, that it can be a challenge, especially getting test data right. And with quality, it's also about the data being representative. So you want, ideally, you would want to test with production data, right? But often that's not possible, which is actually due to data privacy also often, which is the first point. If you then have to make your own test data and do that based on your own defined logic, that can take can take a lot of time, of course, but also the quality is definitely, if you just do it yourself, it's very unlikely that it will be up to the standards of your production data.
Yeah, interesting. So if I hear you correctly, you have the first group, those are potentially companies that use personal data as test data, and consequently, those people have privacy concerns. And the other group, data quality, they are potentially working with solutions, had to mask, de-identify that data, but it doesn't result in proper test data, and that makes, of course, the life of testers more difficult. And you are, of course, looking for a solution that's on the other end preserving the privacy, and on the other end also preserves the data quality to make it suitable. Yeah, definitely interesting to take that also forward during the demo. Let's proceed to the second question. I think this maybe boils down to the result of the previous question. Does your test data reflect your production data? Because if it doesn't, then it's probably not proper quality, and it's maybe not usable. Interesting to see 87 votes. Most people voted partially. Quite some people actually voted yes, and 15% not at all. That sounds not too bad, not too good. Any reflections on this? Do you see this more often?
So I'm also good to hear that there are actually quite some organizations that also do think their data reflects production data. It also depends a lot, of course, on the types of testing that you need to do. I see the majority still sees that there is improvement there. And that's what we, of course, typically the organizations we work with, they also get to us because they see that, or even in the case where they see the test data as not at all reflecting production data. So definitely recognizable. And
Yeah, you never know. Maybe those 39% of the people, maybe they are actually using personal data from production as test data, and then of course it reflects the production data. And that's of course also not what you want as an organization. Let's see, because a lot of organizations are of course not using production data, because that's of course not allowed. or not to bring in line with the privacy regulations. And the question is, okay, if you want to do something with your test data to protect it, how much time do you spend on it creating high quality test data? Is that less than 25% of your time, 25 to 50% of your time, 51 to 75% of your time, or more than 75% of your time? And I think quite interesting results. Only 27% voted for less than 25% of their time, meaning that more than almost three quarter of the persons is spending more than 25% of their time on creating test data. Are you surprised by this, or do you see this more often that it takes a lot of time to create test data?
Well, I must say this is really quite a lot. Also, some saying more than 75% even. But yeah, but this is in the end, I'm not in a sense surprised, because actually our platform is really dedicated to also helping solve this problem, so that you can actually generate test data with speed. So that's actually, yeah, so well, more than 75%, I really think that's really a lot actually. But yeah, our platform is also yeah, one of the key value pillars is about, well, generating test data with speed. So yeah, well, it's this explains indeed that's the still problem. So yeah.
Yeah, let's see how we can bring some agility in those organizations, because you want to spend those resources smarter. And I think one of the final questions, which data are you actually using for test data management? Real production data, synthetic data, or a combination of both? I think only 30% is using production data, and most people are using something else. Surprised by that, given the number of organizations that talk to us stating that they are using production data and that they want to change that.
To be honest, not so surprised that also still production data is being used. I think, yeah, I think of course there are also some situations maybe where there is no personal data involved, but yeah, very often there is. And of course, it's tempting to use the production data because it's, well, it's the real data, so that really tells you the right story, right? But yeah, in principle, it's not allowed, of course. So yeah, so yeah, we want to help, of course, those organizations to, well, have as good as real data, so production-like data using the synthetic data. So, but yeah, it's also good to see that there are quite some organizations already moving to synthetic data. So that's
Yeah.
a positive development.
Definitely good to see, and I think yeah, these are of course some poll questions, because it's also interesting to see what the audience is actually telling and what is happening in reality. I think finally, I think we wanted to close down with some results and yeah, concrete numbers related to the hidden cost of poor test data management, and I think they all are related to the questions that we asked in preparation. So I think the average financial losses caused by performance failures is around 5 million per year. Quite a lot of yeah, waste, and yeah, also the reason why you want to test to make sure that you do not have performance failures. And yeah, that is also the second thing. What had the loss in the US for testing failures, including downtime and defect fixes, is estimated about 59 billion per year. So that's quite a big number of losses due to failures and downtime. And yeah, of course, that is what you prevent, and that's why you need proper testing. And yeah, the foundation of proper testing is, of course, proper test data, because without proper test data, you cannot do proper testing. And yeah, I think the third number is also quite interesting, because here it makes it concrete. The decrease in productivity due to poor data quality is around 20%. So without proper test data, you cannot do proper testing, and that will result in a decrease in productivity. And that's, of course, not what you want. Because if you have improper testing, there will be development cost attributed to post-deployment effects. That's estimated around 30%. So literally, organizations are making costs because they have post-deployment effects, and that's of course what you want to prevent during the testing phase. Because if you have a bug in production that costs 100 times more than when you would find that bug in the design phase with a production failure costing up to 1 million per hour. So that's quite an interesting number. Making sure that you find and fix the bugs before going to production is of course of the essence. Going a little bit towards compliance, because of course using personal data as test data is obviously not something that you want. And this is a number 20 million estimate or 4% of turnover in GDPR fines for non-compliance. And that's of course something you don't want to have as organization. And this is only the direct cost of the fine. It also can of course harm the reputation. Finally, have 40% higher cost when testing manually. You want to, of course, automated and fast modern solutions to do this. With an average cost of IT downtime for enterprises of around 5.6 thousand per month. And those are some numbers that are just good to be aware of, that testing and test data is not about finding bugs on itself. It's also about making sure that you do not end up in one of those baskets as organization. You want to prevent that those hidden costs will hurt your organization. And I think the key question is, how can you realize this? How can you make sure that you have proper test data in place to make sure that you do not face those hidden costs? And I think that brings us to the second point of the agenda today. And I think we will do this and answer this question not with a presentation, but with a live demo. We want to show you in this demo directly how you can be able to realize test data in a smart way and make sure that you can make sure that your organization is future proof. So beyond traditional test data management, you want to make sure that you have proper test data. Before we go to the demo, a quick introduction about the deployment and architecture of the platform. It's good to know that we always deploy via Docker or Kubernetes in the safe and trusted environment of our customers. So that can be on-premise, in any private cloud environment. And this is all to make sure that the data never leaves your safe premise, and that we can really synthesize at the source. And that Syntho never sees, processes, or receives any of the real data to get towards the test data. And finally, of course, test data is also something that needs to be integrated into the organization. And for that, we have various out-of-the-box connectors to make sure that we can directly connect to the source data. And that's the data where that can be your production data or the data that you want to mimic. And we connect to the destination database. And those can be your test environments and your test development and acceptance environments. That is an introduction to the demo. Just wanted to make sure that if you have questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. We would like to emphasize that we will cover them during this webinar. And if not, then we will make sure that we come back to that in the recap mail. And I think this is the moment to hand over the floor to Marijn for the live demo and to demonstrate how you can revolutionize your test data with synthetic data.
Yes, thank you. Then I will take over the screen. All right. So we currently arrived at the landing panel of our application. which is called the Launch Your Workspace panel. So as the name suggests, here you can launch your workspace, and you can use the workspace to configure your data generation, so to generate your test data. You can do that by connecting to a source database. So that typically contains your production data. Of course, you can also open an existing workspace in case you have already generated test data before and want to keep your test data up to date, for example, then you can continue working in the workspace that you created before. But let's see how does it work in terms of the flow when you start from scratch. So to create a new workspace, you connect to your source database, and the source database may contain your production data, can also be a copy of your production data. You fill in the details, and next you do this as well for the destination database. So that's where you're going to write the generated test data to. And again, good to stress this that everything here runs in your own secure infra. So even the software itself, the application itself, can even run without an internet connection available. So it's really really secure. So as a next step, before you create a workspace, there's one feature I want to highlight, because this feature actually also highlights two of the main value points of the Syntho application, which are speed and versatility, also introduced by Kees before. And without going into the details of this feature, but what this feature essentially does, it allows you to set what we call a workspace mode. So it already, based on what you want to achieve, so what kind of test data that you want to generate, and how you want to generate it, the workspace will already be pre-configured with all kinds of smart configurations for you, which can save a lot of time. And also there is versatility in there, because we have that's which our platform really contains all the different types of synthetic data generation methods in a single platform. So from de-identification methods up to even AI-powered synthesization methods. So really depending on your use case, you would select an option here. For example, if you want to de-identify, what will happen is that the Syntho platform will already run a PII scan, what we call it. So that's actually some PII stands for personally identifiable information. So those are typically columns in your database containing the most sensitive data, so columns that can be used to directly identify an individual. So for example, person names, phone numbers, social security numbers. If I enable this de-identify option, a PII scan will run to first detect all those PII columns, and then it will suggest generators to replace, essentially protect those PII columns. And it will already do it for you before the workspace has even been created. So this can save a lot of time in manual configurations. So there are also other flavors from mock data, which is a different types of synthetic data, until synthesization, which is really including AI-powered synthetic data. Well, after this step, you select Create Workspace, and then the workspace will be created for you, and it will show up in this overview of workspaces. Now I'm just going to select one of the workspaces, which I called Patients Database, because underneath there's a Patients Database, actually not containing real patient information, otherwise I couldn't demo it here. So it looks quite representative. So we are forwarded to this screen now, the job configuration screen. And here we can configure everything around my data generation job. So what does that mean? Well, typically the configurations can be done on the table level and on the column level. And as you can see already here on the screen, on the left menu, we see all the tables that reside under this database that I'm connected to. And you can see all those tables are now currently under include which means they will be included in this data generation job. Well, if I have a very large database, it may well be that some tables are less relevant to include for my test cases. So I can then also decide, for example, to exclude particular tables like this. Well, in this case, we're just going to include all the tables. And yeah, as a follow-up step, we can well also look at some of the column level configurations we can do. And yeah, and as you can see, there are already quite some columns labeled as PAI. They're red highlighted as well, really seeming to suggest, hey, we have to do something with those columns. And yeah, it's good to mention though these PAI columns were not didn't come there because I added those manually, but those came as a result of the PAI scanner that has been run in the background before I created the workspace. And yeah, so I can decide from this screen to replace each of those PAI columns or protect them. But I can also switch to the PAI tab, where I get an overview of all those columns that were identified by the PAI scanner as PAI. And the PAI scanner also actually suggested how to replace those columns. So here in this overview, we see for this particular table, there are 17 unprotected PAI columns, meaning that the PAI scanner identified 70 columns as PAI, which are not protected yet. So I didn't replace them with a generator yet. And well, 0 are protected, and there are a couple of non-PAI columns. Well, the goal really is to move all these 17 unprotected PAI columns to the protected PAI columns tab. So how will I do that? Starting on top here, I see, for instance, this address column, and the PAI scanner was 85% confident that this column contains addresses. And if I now select this button here, it's already pre-filled the configuration on how to replace this column. And here it suggested actually to protect this column using an address mocker. So I can preview actually some of the values that come out of there. Potentially I can change some of the, set some of the parameters, but let's just keep things to the default here. And then I can confirm like this. And as you can see, this particular column has now moved to the protected PAI columns tab. And that's really the essence. So like what you want to do here is you want to get rid of all of those unprotected PAI columns. So get this value to 0 and move them all here. So we can do that like this, one by one. Can check the suggestion that has been done. Seems to make sense. And then I can move along like this. So that's a bit the essence. So, and we have a lot of built-in mockers already. We have roughly 150 different types of mockers. That makes it really quick and easy for you to generate new data. We also have them in a lot of different locales, which also take into account different formats. For example, social security numbers in the Netherlands. Let me check. Here we have a social security number column. Social security numbers, they have to satisfy a particular checksum algorithm. Well, that's all accounted for in these mockers, so that the test data can really be used reliably for your testing. And yeah, so these are all more out of the box mockers that directly can be used to replace those PAI columns. There are also options to define mockers more specifically based on maybe some very specific values that are only applicable for your business, for example. I'm just giving as an example here, we have this driver's license column. And let's say we don't want to use the driver's license mocker, but want to configure it based on the kind of values we see here and the pattern we see here. So what pattern do we see here? We see each value starts with S999, and it's followed by 5 random digits. So how can I set that using a mocker? One of the options is using the custom text mocker for this. And what I can do here is I can fill in one of those values. But what I want to do now, let me actually just click it here. What will now happen is that each value that will be outputted starts with S999, but these hashtags will be replaced by a random digit. If I go to this hover, you can also see a description on how to use this mocker. So that's essentially what's happening here. So here I can, really define my own kind of logic here to generate realistic test values, essentially. I also noticed there were some missing values in the original column, so let's try to simulate that by filling the blank percentage. You can see here now there will be some null values also, which makes the data more realistic, more reflective of the production data. So these are some of the mockers that we have, and just highlighting a couple of options. What's very important also, and how you within those mockers is in the generated data in general is consistency. And what does that mean, consistency? So you want to generate consistent results in the sense that you will be able to get consistency over different data generation jobs in time, but also over tables and over different systems, so that you can still, in the generated test data, you can still link together test data, for example, across tables, but also across different systems. So how do we achieve that? I think one part, which may not be the most interesting part, but I want to briefly mention it. One part is in foreign keys. So in databases, you have relationships typically defined in so-called foreign keys. And essentially our platform will ensure that foreign keys that are part of the database are reproduced into the test database. You have a bunch of options. If they are not part of your database, you can also add them in manually, or you can run a foreign key scan. So this is really one part to ensure that table relationships and consistency is maintained. But the other part is about non-key columns, and I think this is the more interesting part for now. Because non-key columns there for the generated data, you also want to ensure consistency. So, for example, here we have this city column, and what do we see here? We see 3 times the value Boston occurring here. If we are going to replace this column using a city mocker, for example, what we want is that we want to consistently replace the value Boston with the same output value. And that's not only maybe relevant for this column, but also for if these values occur in maybe in other tables or in other systems, so that we can still link together those values. So how do I do that? I can go again to this column model like this. And here we have the city mocker already applied. But rather than just applying it like this, I can enable consistent mapping. With the consistent mapping enabled, you can see here now the 5th, 6th, and 8th value, which were corresponding to the value Boston in the source data. Those are now 3 times here replaced with the same consistent output value, so the fake city name here. And this really works across systems and across time, as I mentioned. So if I would start a data generation job in another system using another workspace, and there also the value Boston is occurring, and there I also apply the city mocker with consistent mapping enabled, then Boston will also be replaced with this particular value. That can be really valuable in testing, also for testing across different systems, integration tests. So that's we see that is being used a lot for those situations. And good to mention here, by the way, although this feature is called consistent mapping, there are no literal mappings stored in the application. So this is actually using a seed-based function underneath, which means we don't store actual mappings. So from a security perspective, that's also desired. All right. So yeah, we have been largely focusing now on the different mockers and the different options you have with these mockers. But yeah, there are even more options, more sophisticated options in case you, for example, want to generate data from scratch. So there may be situations where you don't have any data yet, or there are very specific and more complex business rules that you want to model. For that, we have rule-based synthetic data methods as part of the platform as well. And one of those options where we facilitate that are calculated columns. As you can see here, if I select calculated column, we get this formula field. So here I can enter some formulas using the calculated column syntax, which also largely corresponds with kind of SQL syntax. To make it more familiar for people who are typically involved in testing. But yeah, here I can really define my custom rules. So just to have as an example how to use it. For example, let's say I want to fill this first name column, where I can of course use a first name mocker. But let's say I want to make it dependent on another column, namely this prefix column, where we have the values Mr. and Mrs. So in this case, if there's Mr., I want to have a male first name here. If there's Mrs., I want to have a female first name here. So how do I do that? I can use the calculated columns for that. And I can write, for example, an if function. And it works like that. I can fill in the if function, refer to the prefix column like this. I can say if this prefix column is equal to Mr., in that case, I will apply the first name male mocker. I could say, yeah, in the other situation, I would apply a first name female mocker. So I can preview some of the values. And now, based on this logic, now the appropriate mocker will be applied. I can even go crazy here with multiple nested if statements if I want, if there are more options. But this is just to illustrate how this particular feature works and can really be used to generate data with very specific rules. All right. So those are some of the generation methods. Of course, the versatility of the platform is also, for a large extent, also in the types of different generation methods we provide. So as I mentioned, alone for the mockers, we already provide 150 different generators. For calculated columns, we provide more than 50 different types of functions. We have a lot of masking functions as well. We also have AI-powered generation. We can dedicate a separate session to that, but just want to highlight a little bit when you can use that. So AI-powered generation is typically useful if you want to preserve statistics between columns. So you want to generate data where statistical patterns are preserved. So for example, correlations between columns. So let's say I want to replace this latitude, longitude, and healthcare expenses columns with new fake data to make it safe with synthetic data. Then I can decide to apply AI-powered generation on each of those columns. And what will happen in consequence is that for those columns, an AI model is trained, and the trained model will then learn all these complex statistical relationships across these columns, and then generate entirely new synthetic records which still preserve the statistical information. So they're not we are generating new values, so it's safe in that sense. However, the statistical patterns are still preserved. So it may be that healthcare expenses may be higher at certain latitude and longitudes than in other latitude, longitudes, or at other locations. And those kind of patterns will be well reproduced with this AI-powered generation. But yeah, the actual data is not copied, so it's entirely synthetic. So in that sense, safe. So yeah, so that's just another option of the different generation methods you can use here, which can be very relevant in testing. Just to so we have now went through all the different ways to generate your data. Just want to highlight a few more things which are more about how do you handle, for example, changes in your source database, because it can well be that, well, it's very likely even that your production database changes frequently. So, for example, new tables could be added, removed, columns can be added, removed, or changed. So we need to ensure that those changes are reflected here. And for that, we have the option to sync your workspace. So with this sync button here. And essentially what it will do, it will ensure that this workspace is always in sync with your source database. So if you add a new table and I press that sync button, then the table will also be shown here. And we can also decide as in a consequence to protect that table. So I think that's an important one. Also, typically when you want to generate test data, it's likely that you may want to collaborate with different people to generate the test data, maybe to evaluate certain settings, but for example, but yeah, there you also want to control, if you collaborate with people, like what are the kind of access rights that they will get. So for that we also have this, one of these options is the share workspace options, an option where you can share with different users. So these are all of our colleagues here. So you can share the workspace like this, and also assign different rights. So like what they can do, and also whether they will be able to actually see the data. So if I disable this button like here, then this data would not be visible for this particular user, which can be a policy in your organization, for example, that you some people may only be able to access the production data. This is just well, scratching the surface, you could say, of the platform, but I already hope this gives some insight into how you can generate test data at ease, at scale, using our platform.
Thanks, Marijn. And I think we see already a lot of questions popping in via the chat, inviting everyone indeed to share them with us. We will cover them in a bit during the Q&A. Before we do, we just wanted to add and finalize with the value that you can create with test data management. Of course, as Marijn already demonstrated, you can create a test data set, test environment with data that is protected, securing, of course, your data, making sure that you comply with regulations, and that you can do that in a easy, fast, and agile way, to make sure that you always have proper, high quality test data at hand. But as a result of that, we see that organizations can realize value, reduce up to 50% of testers' time spent looking for data. A lot of testers are wasting time of getting the test data right. That's, of course, time you rather spend on actually doing those tests. And yeah, you can reduce up to 20% time of the time for testers waiting for data. So they're not only looking for the data, but they're also waiting for the data. And that is, of course, time, as mentioned, you rather spend on actually doing those tests. Organizations can also realize up to 95% reduction in defects creation by detecting and resolving issues earlier, saving up to 50K per defect over time. And that is, of course, value you can create with proper test data. Without proper test data, you see that you will realize those the defects potentially later in the cycle or even in production, and that is, of course, not what you want. And organizations have fewer redundant copies of a single database, reducing costs associated with hardware, licenses, and support. We see that a lot of organizations that are doing those things by themselves struggle to get the test data right. They have many copies everywhere, and that's, of course, not secure. It creates a mess, and as mentioned, also results in costs. And yeah, that is something you can realize. In terms of the return on investment of Syntho, we see that is 1 to 5 times in the first year, depending a bit on how well you are optimized within that year. And we see that the typical implementation of Syntho takes 1 month, and that's also within every new customer. What we state in the implementation plan had to make sure that within 1 month you are set, ready to realize that value and get the test data in your test environments. If there are questions on this, we typically do sessions specifically for your organization to talk about those topics and to do those specific calculations. Inviting you all, if you're interested to that, to reach out to us after the webinar. And I think that is also the moment to proceed with the Q&A. Maran, I think we received some questions from the audience. I already see here a question, quite an interesting one, that we received from the audience. Is this technique also possible for a hospital that works with Chipsoft?
Definitely. That's also a possibility. And what we hear, for example, with we've spoken to multiple medical organizations that also work with Chipsoft software. And what we often see there is also that the data, that they still possess the data, but for example, a challenge there is that there are many tables in the first place, but the relationships between those tables are stored at the Chipsoft site. Foreign keys, for example, that's one of the challenges. And for that, we also specifically have a solution, which is, for example, the option to add foreign keys through the platform, so that you can still ensure that in the generated test data, relationships are preserved. And you don't have to manually, one by one, add those foreign keys. You can either import them using a JSON file, or you can run a foreign key scan inside the platform. So those are some challenges we saw, in particular with Chipsoft software.
Yeah, and I think that highlights also a bit the smart solutions that we want to have in place to also tackle those more complex use cases. Another question that came in is how we deploy, of course, in the environment of the customer. That's correct. But the question is, how does that work cost-wise? Because that means that the organizations also is running the hardware resources. That's correct. Is there an estimate about what the typical hardware resources are that are required to work with the platform, so that that organizations can have an idea about what is needed for that?
Yeah, so about the hardware. Indeed, it runs in the own infra. So also it runs on the hardware of the customer. And actually, we have in our documentation, which is docs.syntho.ai, maybe we can share it. Also an overview with the hardware specifications that are required. Typically yeah, that starts with well, some CPUs, that's between 12 to 20 virtual CPUs to go specific. Start with memory 32 gigs and some disk storage of 128 gig. That's typically how it starts. But all depends a bit, of course, on the amount of data that you also want to process through the application. But yeah, we can share that we will share the documentation to the relevant sections as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, another question that popped in. Someone was interested in yeah, some specific questions for their organization related to the deployment. And how do we typically do that? Do we do demo sessions or deep dive sessions? How can people get in touch with you or the technical team with those questions?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, typically when we work with organizations, we go through an onboarding phase. And there, yeah, we go one step by step from well, getting requirements clear towards an actual deployment and successful use of the platform. Yeah, part of that is, for example, also a Syntho bootcamp where we do train you to use the platform. Yeah, so that's all part of the well, the experience when we work with organizations. So yeah.
Clear. I think we have some time left for a couple of questions. I see here someone is interested in building a full stack data platform to offer to companies. Can Syntho be integrated in such stack, or how would that work?
Yeah, of course, curious to hear more about the details of what this full stack data platform exactly is and how does it look
That
like.
can be quite broad indeed.
Yeah, but yeah, in principle, when we are talking about integrations, we more often get to our well, REST API version of the application. And so I just showed the UI version, so the GUI version. But we also have a REST API where you can actually essentially do all of the same things as that you can do in the UI. However, you will call it using a REST API, so you can use that to integrate it with within well, maybe your data or test pipelines. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I think the final question that we received was from someone that is interesting to talk further about the potential value for their organization and how we can reach out to us related to that. And I think, yeah, I wanted to share this final slide because if you are interested in exploring the impact on your organization, you can contact me or my colleague Stefan. We have here also our email addresses written down so that you can contact us or automatically schedule a meeting via this link. Also via our website, we have also the opportunity to directly book a demo with our experts, and that can also be used to deep dive into specific topics. So inviting you all, if you are interested, to reach out so that we can deep dive and support you with getting your test data right. And yeah, then as a final note, what we will do after this webinar is we will send an email to all of you in which you will find the answers on all the questions that have been asked to us during and before the webinar. We will include the slides and we will include the webinar recordings together with all our contact details so that you have everything available for that. I would like to thank you all for your participation and also contribution with all those interesting questions. And we would like to see you soon and deep dive further in any questions you may have. Thank you and hope to speak soon.